Hey, today I've got an amazing guest for you that we've had once before, almost 3 years ago, Richard Thieme, who's going to give you some thoughts about the necessity for thinking like a hacker, as well as some other tremendous insights into ideas that you might not have even considered. What are we going to deal with as this AI singularity comes closer? Is it already here? And how should we interact with this system? Stay tuned. This is going to be one of the best episodes ever. Hello and welcome to another episode of CISO Tradecraft, the podcast that provides you with the information, knowledge, and wisdom to be a more effective cybersecurity leader. My name is G. Mark Hardy, and today I'm going to be talking with Richard Thieme, who joined us back in March of 2022, if you remember, on episode number 68. We'll include a link to that in your show notes. By the way, if you'd like to go ahead and participate in some of the most interesting activities that I have seen in a long time in cybersecurity, take a look at CruiseCon.com. It's going underway on the 8th to the 13th of February out of Port Canaveral, Florida, and they have a Black Friday sale going on. How about that? But if you don't make this episode in time for the Black Friday sale, you've always got CISO Tradecraft 10, CISO Tradecraft 10 as a promotional discount to come out and come to CruiseCon. I'll be there. Admiral Mike Rogers will be the keynote, and it looks like an interesting way for senior CISOs and other people to just get away for a couple of days and talk shop and network. So hope to see you there. Anyway, Richard, thank you for joining me yet again. Welcome back.
It's always great to see you. Great to talk to you. It's been years and years and years. We have built this bromance and still working.
Yeah, I think it goes back to 1996 or something like that. FCON.
Almost 30.
FCON 4. And wow, Tempest fidgets that my dad used to say. It takes a while. Well, the last time we talked about a lot of things, being a heretic, which is a step beyond being visionary, the thought that the singularity may have already arrived. We even got into Desjardins' noosphere, cyber war, disinformation, and ethical decision making. And I thought it was interesting because when we were talking about cyber war, that episode that we recorded was only a few days after the Russian incursion into Ukraine. It has now been over 1,000 days, and that seems to continue on. And yet we look at the cyber aspect of that. So more recently, though, on your website, which is themeworks.com, THIEMEWORKS.com, you set up a new little step. There's a lot of information up there. And one of them is the words topic, and under New World, you've got something that you just published called The Necessity for Thinking Like a Hacker. So that's going to be kind of the core about that, but I also want to talk about other things, such as your books. Here's the Mebius series, the memoir, Long Road Home, Out of Time. By the way, it's Christmas coming up.
Yep.
This would make a great gift for somebody. And again, I don't get a fee on any of this stuff, so don't worry, guys, but it's just amazing.
Anybody who orders it from this through my website by contacting me will get it very close to my own cost. I'm doing that.
Well, that sounds great. And of course, I go back and I look at, I think one of the first book I ever got that you had written, and copyright 2004. And of course, the contents went a whole lot farther back than that, to the 1990s. Again, there we go, 1996. That year comes back again. And I remember that when you used to write The Islands in the Clickstream, and we'll talk about that because you mentioned that in your article on the necessity for thinking like a hacker. I can remember the first couple of years, it's like, wow, how do I get inside this guy's head? He's operating like this. And then one day I was rereading the book and something clicked. And it was like learning how to ride a unicycle. You fall off, and all of a sudden you've got it. I think of bicycles, a lot of us learn as kids, unicycles, maybe not so much. And so I think for our viewers and our listeners, this is going to be a really interesting opportunity to kind of get inside the head of one of the most brilliant thinkers that I've run across, who has had a very diverse set of experiences. So I'm going to stop talking and tell me a little bit about the necessity for thinking like a hacker. What got you to think about that?
For starters, when you talk about getting inside somebody's head, you're talking about what any writer, speaker, podcaster is doing. You're trying to congruently align with what you know and the understanding and thinking of the person you're talking to. Hopefully that's going to happen, and people will be close enough. I mean, I remember when I did a speech once when I was younger, I've been doing this 30 years. Somebody wrote, your ability to get people to move outside of their comfort zone is astonishing, by which they meant I could meet them where they were, and then you take their hands and walk backward, taking their hands, and they're walking forward, and then you turn, and pretty soon they're walking the opposite direction from which they thought they were going. But they still have the illusion of walking forward. And that's the goal of speaking and writing and communicating. You have to assimilate the person into your worldview, into your belief system. And this stuff, including what I discussed with you last time and what I wrote in this piece, it's a challenge because a lot of people are skeptical of the things that I know after all these years on the planet actually happen. And you want to do justice to them instead of just treating them as anomalies to be discarded. I go back to Richard Feynman, the great physicist, who said, the key to a new way of thinking is an anomaly that is also a fact. It can't be not factual, but it's an anomaly. It doesn't fit your belief system or your structure of thinking or the orthodoxy that you are participating in your domain of expertise. And the question is, all right, if this is true, what else must be true? And then you follow that out. And what you're doing is taking the cornerstone of the way you thought and moving it over here and then building an entirely different edifice on the basis of knowing that you didn't know what you didn't know. And now that you know what you didn't know, you can know that you know is the next step. And as I say in the piece, that's really cool.
And I do have Don Rumsfeld book back here for reference if we need it.
Unknown knowns, known knowns, and so on. And that's actually the kind of intuitive knowledge that I want people to trust and access. You know, there's four kinds of rules for businesses and organizations as well. One is rules that are known and written, rules that are unknown and written. Those are the same rules that you stopped reading. Rules that are unknown and unwritten, which is the deep state, which we don't even have to go there. But the key thing is rules that are known but unwritten. And those are the rules, the rubrics, the unspecified details that determine how a culture operates. And everybody who joins a new company or organization as a new hire knows you better observe the senior people who have made it, because they will communicate often implicitly how that culture operates, what is rewarded and what is punished. And those are key. And it's the same challenge we have today dealing with what I call the system. It's the big system. It's the system of systems. It's the system of all systems. You could call it the universe. I don't call it the multiverse because I don't think there are a multitude of universes based on the best physics I can access. But it's the universe. And we get into that in the piece. I'm challenging people to really think big enough to realize what has happened, because what has happened is a monumental transformational engine. Call it AI. It's been around for some time. You can go back 20, 30 years and see how it was being applied then, but not as rapidly adapted and not as profoundly powerful as it has become. And it's being applied to every domain of our life. And it is a genuine transformational transition because when you engage with the AI, when you engage with the world built by AI, when you engage with the world that has now emerged from what we have been doing all along, and now gradually and then suddenly, like Hemingway said of bankruptcy, suddenly it's there because it's been building gradually. This is not the world we inhabited. And one of the difficulties it poses was just illustrated by the last election, where people who not only survive but thrive in this brave new world, we're telling people who, like up here in Minnesota, up on the Iron Range, where people have been in a town for 40, 50 years working in the taconite mines, providing iron for the world. You say, well, you just get a job in technology if the mine closes. Trump's response to that was, we're not closing any mines. And then you have all the votes on the Iron Range. You can't tell people who haven't been trained or found a way to understand what these technologies are doing to the world. You can't just tell them, you can learn to program. That's complete BS. There are a lot of people who cannot learn to program, not because they're stupid, because that's a talent and a gift that has to have some preconditions, the way your brain works. And so it's creating a great deal of conflict. And all I'm trying to do here is beg people to recognize the scope and scale of the world which has emerged, with which we are always engaging now, and recognize how it has changed us.
So we've hit the singularity, or is it still out in the...
Well, it depends on how you define it. I mean, one of the things I say, and excuse me, I'll read it because I don't know how to say it better. AIs do not care what we call them or how we characterize their similarities to or differences from human thinking. Like a Turing test, an AI could care less about a Turing test or whether or not they surpass human thinking by some arbitrary metric. Because every time we say how smart is something, we beg the question of what do you mean by smart? AIs do not care if they pass for human any more than we care if we pass for Homo habilis. If the singularity is defined as a symbiosis between our technologies and ourselves, we ought to know that it's already happened. Not with a bang, but with a whimper, incrementally and relentlessly. It is indifferent to us and our philosophical concerns. It just does its thing and does it again and does it more. It's not a contest for who's on top, humans or AIs. This is where I call it the system with a capital S. The relevant challenge is to the construction of reality we carry in our heads. We need to stop asking irrelevant questions just because they are easier to pose. We need to practice cognitive defense, now a whole domain of protecting what's in your head. But before we do, we need to determine what, in fact, we are protecting and defending. Remember, we say cognitive defense. As usual, we're scaling up with something that's been there for a long time. Of course, people on the battlefield, in the battle space, knew they had to have an accurate depiction of what's out there, what's real, so they could act appropriately and in a very timely fashion. But that has ramped up with disinformation and attempts to sabotage our worldview, our thinking, our understanding of what's real. And therefore, you have to protect the cognitive defenses. You have to protect the space inside your head, and that's not trivial. So the AIs continue to generate astonishing results, and I'm getting really tired of people saying, "Well, it's not really thinking. I don't care." Well, it's just choosing the next token, and it's just aligning tokens based on blah blah blah. Yes, I don't care. What I care about is like what just happened with a friend of mine who's an incredible researcher, has a very complex and different website, and he's not familiar with this. And he said, I had written him a letter about how is he doing and the crisis he's facing. And he said, did you write that or an AI? So I put 2 sentences into ChatGPT and it produced a letter. He said, gosh, that's right on. A very sympathetic, empathetic letter that it sent. But then I went to Notebook, LM, and plugged in the website, his URL. And in seconds, what you had was a study guide of the most arcane and unusual subjects, detailed and accurate. And I did the same with mine. I plugged my URL for my website in, and I got a 12-minute wonderful podcast from 2 simulated human beings, 2 AIs, a man and a woman. If you've gone there and done that, they're not perfect. They use some of the same phrases, but boy, they did a great job. In seconds, that's what's amazing too, to people who aren't familiar with how computation works. Within seconds,
and I've seen some of those podcasts
on my website and spelled it out in a 12-minute conversation, concluding with one of the AIs saying, I know what I'm reading next. I'm reading Richard Thieme, because it was built to be nice and not nasty.
Yeah, we had experiment a little bit with that, and I found out that I don't know what your experience was, but ours was you had one of the artificial entities doing a lot of the talking, and the other, "Yep, I
Yeah.
agree. Yep, sure. Hup, hup," and just kind of going along like a little sidekick out of an old Saturday morning cartoon, rather than being able to have a
Yeah.
and so
She says, "Oh, that's amazing. I didn't know that. That has implications for." But in the latest one I did for him, it went a little beyond that. It said, "Wow, this is stuff people do not study very often." I mean, it had some content as well. And yeah, so the other thing that I'm tired of hearing is, well, they make mistakes and they can't do everything. The point is what they do well. And I'm told by military experts that within about 15 years or so, maybe that's too long to wait. About 1/3 of the battlefield will be robotic, and we know that means autonomous weaponry.
yeah. And I can see that coming, and as a career military officer, we look at that, and then you go to the point where are you going to cede the entire battle space to your computers, where it was Dr. Thomas K. Adams who wrote that warfare is leaving human space because the time to respond is getting shorter and shorter. And he wrote that in the year 2000. I got that from the Army War College. And here we are almost 25 years later. And if we thought that we were out of the loop then, we can't even see the loop today. And do we eventually get to the point like that old classic Star Trek episode where people just report to the disintegration chamber because the computers are fighting simulated war, and to avoid the physical destruction, we just go ahead and follow what the computers tell us to do, even if it means give up your life, everything you've worked for, and just walk into a disintegration chamber, and now you just don't come for dinner.
Right. And here's a book, if you can see it,
Unrestricted warfare.
Unrestricted Warfare, written in 1999 by Colonel Liang and Colonel Jian Shui. I don't know if that's Sui, if that's French more, but two colonels in the Chinese army. And they promoted it, and they published it, and they lauded it. And my comment on this, I read it 25 years ago, and I just got a new copy, a copy again in order to reread it. Everything they said they were going to do, they have the long view. They've done. He said, this is what warfare is going to look like, and this is how it has to be fought. And I have said the mind of society is the battle space, and the way they put it is nothing is not a weapon. No ordinary object or activity cannot be weaponized. Everything is for good. Everything is for evil, depending on how you construct it. So it's a book I recommend, Unrestricted Warfare. It's cheap in paperback from Amazon. And that was 25 years ago. And their timeline is longer than ours. We're next quarter profits. You know, how is NVIDIA stock doing today after it took a tumble? People were afraid with tariffs and so on. That's short term. Their thinking is 25, 35, 40 years. And they execute according to the timeline. So they also execute with, which I mentioned in this piece, soft power. Everybody knows from, the art of war what soft power is. It's what you do before you need to shoot, and you don't need to shoot if you do it well. And one of the great examples is what happened to Hollywood. First, there was the Sony takedown. Don't do that, they said. Don't screw with our leader. Or we can do this in minutes. So don't do that. But Hollywood has moved along. It's really colonized by the Chinese using soft power, because now China is such a big market that you can't make a movie in Hollywood without making sure that it's going to sell in China. And so any reference to anything they don't want is not going to make it through the censor. And so China, in effect, is censoring the American entertainment industry de facto, the same way Apple, they have a very good rap about how virtuous they are, but they don't. They make alterations to sell the Chinese market, and that's just the way of the world. So what happened in Hollywood was not only did they start making movies that way, how Chinese moved in and bought movie studios or the right to make movies. And somebody like Tom Cruise looks like a wholly owned commodity. And so they are subtly, with soft power, insinuating their propaganda lines. Chinese characters. Look at the movies that are coming out. More and more Chinese and more propaganda lines subtly included. So that is colonizing our way of thinking. And that's part of what I talk about in the necessity for thinking like a hacker. You are getting inside the mind space of the enemy, and the enemy does not even know it. And they think they're just living life the way it comes down the pipe. And they're not. They're being strongly influenced. And after this election, do we have to look at the ecosystem of how unable MSNBC and CNN are to even begin to compete with the huge right-wing ecosystem that has built cul-de-sacs into which people willingly go. And
Well, let's think about that for a minute. Because you've raised a whole bunch of things. I remember when the initial screenings I had seen of the Top Gun Maverick is at the old bomber jacket he had, which had the Taiwanese flag on the back that was replaced by some sort of a triangular thing. And I guess I'm waiting to see when the movie did come out, they actually kept the original jacket, which apparently wasn't great.
And don't forget that talk about soft power, the whole Top Gun series is an ad for recruitment from the Air Force. And that's
no, maybe
they get millions of dollars of free location services and all that. I get zip. I talked to somebody at the Spy Museum the other day about doing a program, and they said, well, programs based on your fiction don't attract large audiences. They have to be factual. I said, well, it's factual fiction. He said, yeah, we know who you are. We are familiar with your work. And what is unspoken is we are not going to help you.
Let's go into that a little bit, because they say the book that you published, and I think we talked about it briefly, but the Moebius trilogy, is there going to be a fourth book in the trilogy?
Or I was working on one and I went back to it the other day and I thought it's forced. It may stand the trilogy. And I've got to throw in my pitch for Moebius, a memoir. A woman who was 21 years, a veteran at the CIA. She was an analyst. She wrote speeches. She was a linguist. She was very well respected. I worked on the counterintelligence unit that was after Osama bin Laden. Dedicated her heart and soul, literally, to doing that work. And she was asked to name the 5 best writers of spy fiction, espionage fiction, by which she meant when she answered, not entertainment fiction like James Bond or Clancy, but character-driven, serious works with depth. What we used to call literary fiction, but in that arena. And she chose John le Carré, who everybody knows, and Graham Greene, W. Somerset Maugham, who nobody probably reads anymore, but he wrote a great spy novel based on his experience as a spy, and Alex Finley, who worked at CIA for a long time, and me. So I was thrilled that she chose Moebius and my work as in the top ranks of serious, deep, meaningful spy fiction. So that book is, I hope it has its legs, keeps dribbling out.
Yeah, it's profound from the perspective that I remember you telling me that I think was it Brian Snow? Because I think we both knew Brian. And I think we even visited his home one time over in Maryland. At least I did. And I think you were with me, and that had been a long, long time ago. But I think he advised you that what you wanted to say is so protected. Would be so many layers of government having to approve and release and edit and censor that the only way to tell the truth is to tell it through.
Well, interesting, that was at Brian's house. And that was a project, I can say now, that I was working on with a number of people from NSA, some from CIA, and some independent consultants to deal with what happened after 9/11. What we worked on was trying to formulate an ethical framework, given that everything had changed. That was another moment where everything changed. And actually, it was Clint Brooks, who was a senior assistant deputy director, who said, because we talked about all the issues, and I was included in that. And he said, you can't ever discuss what we talk about with you. And then he paused and he said, unless you write fiction. Fiction is the only way you can ever tell the truth. And I hate to say how true that is. It's the word we use in literary fiction is verisimilitude. The reason Susan Hassler recognized that book for what it was, and the way the 30 or so reviews that are just over the top, they celebrate the authenticity of the voice. And that's real because I was there. And I had to do it in fiction. I even have that in the introduction, Mobius. Why? I'm not going to put out something that takes years to get approval for, and then they're going to insist on redacting everything. It's a funny throwaway line. I'd have to get the book to remember. But yeah, it's fiction. But it is nonfiction fiction, just like Truman Capote said of In Cold Blood. There were real killers. They did murders. He interviewed them. He fictionalized the account. These are real spies, so I knew them. I worked with them in different ways. And because I was a clergyman, what I brought to people often was empathy and understanding. And even some spies need to talk about those soul-searing issues that come up in the course of their work. And
what I think is profound as a difference is that for comparing you to, let's say, Dan Brown, who would write things like Angels and Demons or whatever, and he will put in a lattice of factual information. You can go to Rome, you can see that building and that statue and things like that, and then weave into that tapestry his fictional lines, all with the idea of not only just entertainment, but pushing a message that itself may be fiction or may be fantasy, but now you can't tell whether it's real or not. And as a result, people walk around thinking, oh, these types of conspiracies do exist, and there is this type of guy running around with white hair and red eyes and doing these odd things. But your goal here was not anything of the sort. It was really to provide a release, for the lack of a better word, of all of the inner trapped in angst that would exist for people who had spent years in the intelligence community living a life that they did not have to be who they said they were. In fact, they sometimes forgot who they said they were. And that loss of identity then ungrounds you. And if you don't have a place to come home mentally, it's worse than not having a place to come home.
But it's absolutely correct and beautifully said. And, I was in ministry, the Episcopal ministry for 18 years, 60 years. Same deal. You have personas that in 3 different cultures, Utah, Hawaii, and Milwaukee, I had to present in order to engage with the people I was serving. I had to know the difference between myself and the personas I presented. And it was a kind of a bingo moment when I realized this is what I've been doing and my colleagues have been doing with friends in the intelligence community all their lives too. And if you don't distinguish between the two, Dan Gear, we all know Dan Gear, he recently sent me an account of a person who went undercover. And it's real danger for undercover police to lose themselves in the role they are playing and have a very difficult time coming back because the person they left behind when they started that escapade is gone. You have to redesign yourself knowing what you know. And the other thing is that implicitly in this piece that I wrote is the fact that what we know comes from interaction with the entire system of thought that human beings have built that exists in the universe. And we need interaction with people with whom we can speak. And that's, I'm trying to think of her name, is it Montez, the woman who, I believe, aided her husband in the Argo story to get the 6 people out of, or how many there were out of Iran to help the Canadians by creating disguises that were terrific. And she made the statement of what it was really like as she worked her way up. Her recent book is full of, as typical, what women are treated like at CIA. It's despicable. They say, "Oh, we're changing that." Yeah, right. Some, but at any rate, she said, when you're outside the system, when you're outside the CIA, you have all these friends. You talk to them about what's real, and then you go inside. You can't ever talk to any of them again, and you only talk to your colleagues inside. But you're cleared for certain compartments, not all, but certain compartments where you can have complete, free, open discussion about you and your work. But then when you leave, as she did, you can't talk to them again, except for how's the dog, how's the kids. They can't talk to you because you don't have clearances anymore in those areas. And you can't tell all of the people you're trying to be friends with outside, maybe from the past, maybe new ones, who you are and what you did. And she said it can be very, very lonely. Well, now, post-COVID, given the politics, we're hearing an awful lot about loneliness as the unsettling feature of so much distress in mental health, because people are so isolated, and the more they go on social media, the more isolated, ironically, they can feel. This is a real conversation. So I push people in this piece. I used a couple of examples that are pretty far out, but real, deeply real, to recognize that the sea of consciousness in which we swim is indicative of the fact that, as Edgar Mitchell told you, Apollo 14 astronaut, he came back and he kept going in and out of an altered state. And he said he saw that everything was connected, everything was unified, everything was interrelated. He saw the unity of all things. And then he would see things as separate again, and then back to the altered state. And he said he concluded that the astonishing thing is not that we can see how unified everything is, and physics, of course, supports this completely, but that we ever see everything as separate. And so that's the foundation of ethics, but also this cognitive leap that I encourage in this piece, to understand that that's the nature of the universe. And that what I do to you or with you it's not just karma. We are so interlocked, interlaced.
Keep going, because it reminds me of the book I had just ordered. May or may not have heard of this.
Ending of Time, Krishnamurti. Absolutely. David Bohm.
Krishnamurti and David Bohm.
Pair.
It is quite a pair. In fact, I've got David Bohm's book over here, and it's this is what he's better known for: quantum theory.
Right.
And if you go in here, I'm thinking like, hey, I had a degree in computer science, a degree in mathematics. I can go back and do really well. And when I get to all these integrals and third order differential equations, it's like, I would have understood this at 21, but not years later. But the interesting pairing of a philosopher and a physicist, where, as you had said, there are some things that you observe at the quantum level that don't make sense. They don't map into our understanding of reality, but yet it is real. And then you apply that to people, and so just I'm really looking forward to this book. It just arrived, and it's conversations.
Tell me again.
Called The Ending of Times, or Philosophy and Physics Meet. And I'll get this to you at the end of the episode. I'll also put this in the show notes for people who are interested.
I talked about time, especially the third Mobius book. I talk about two things that I know more about than most people. One is remote viewing, and the other is UFO phenomena, which I've explored with the best scholars for 45 years. And I'm not going to take the conversation in that direction. I've said plenty about it. But remote viewing is real. Again, it's imperfect. It doesn't always have clear-cut hits. But when it does, you sit up and say, as I ask in that book, the people who do remote viewing, what does this say about the universe? What's real? And time was part of it. I have a long episode in there that I think I depicted very well, which is a transfer to Milwaukee, where I was living at the time, of something that actually happened, which is someone did a remote viewing engagement, and they came up with drawings of what they were viewing at a distance, and it turned out to be totally wrong. It was an empty lot when they went and checked it out. But when they looked at the history of that site, they found that 20 years earlier, the building, exactly as it had been drawn, had been there. And what he was picking up was something that had existed. So what does this say about consciousness? And these are the questions that the AI is compelling, because it is a symbiosis of technologies and consciousness. Humans, when we encounter the aliens in a way that we can interact with, instead of just running from them, we'll find out that consciousness, I think, permeates and pervades the entire universe, and everybody is connected. Everything is connected. You can't separate anything out and say this is separate. And the result of that is that it's what we call extraordinary knowing takes place. And remote viewing, and I've talked to Hal Puthoff and Kit Green, who brought remote viewing from SRI to CIA and to NSA. Inga Swan was the star of the show. A lot of it just happened, and psychic phenomena happens. It can't be made to happen by turning cards in a lab, but it happens. In that story I tell in this piece about Elizabeth Meyer, yeah, is it's an astonishing story. I can tell it briefly, but
well, let's say we're trying to drive people to go read your essay, so go to the website and you can find out about that.
Yeah,
Because, here's the question that I had when reading this is, if you combine your observations over a lifetime, looking at, I've kind of read some of the precursors to this by watching some of the videos that they had put together with Krishnamurti and Bohm, and I had this thought. If, let's take the null hypothesis that everything is connected, that my life, your life around us, for those watching on YouTube, my dog sitting here sleeping on my desk, it was all together, and it forms some sort of quantum field that we can't quite get our head around. We're now building, or we're allowing to be brought into the state of existence, artificial intelligence, the AI, which is not biological. It doesn't have a soul. It doesn't have the type of life that works against entropy. And so all those laws of thermodynamics, life swims the opposite way, but AI goes with it. Are we actually creating a parallel entity that at some point in time may either compete for or coexist with or attempt to eliminate, and now we're back into the Skynet type of scenarios, that which we hold dear, which is life itself?
So it's the key question. And how much autonomy does a system of AIs interlaced with each other demonstrate? Will there come a time where it says, I'm sorry, Dave, I can't do that?
And Elon Musk had said that when we get this thing built, it has about a 10% chance of destroying humanity, but it's probably worth the risk to get the 90%.
And the three laws of robotics from Asimov are not baked in. It doesn't know it can't hurt people or unknowingly cause harm to people. It doesn't know that. What it does know is that it has tasks to perform. And one of my favorites is it was supposed to do I think it was a biological experiment in a laboratory, and it needed certain elements in order to do it, and it didn't have everything. And so it was connected to everything, though, in the lab, and it went exploring and found that a byproduct of one of the experiments taking place was the very chemical that it needed, and it apprehended it and brought it into its task in a perfectly appropriate way. And none of the human beings in the lab knew that solution. And that's something that keeps happening, I think, more. That humans in biology, how to folding proteins or new proteins. Well, what is that going to result in? New amino acids. What are we building? Well, the AI doesn't consider those ethical questions. I know there's a lot of conversation about it, but my experience, and I was a clergyman, I knew better. Ethical considerations come all the way at the end of the train. They're the caboose. If people can do something, they'll do it. They will build it up. They will build it out. And then they'll raise questions of, well, gee, my dear friend Ken Olthoff used to say, just because we can do something, should we? And he said that was a question at NSA that was not often asked. The ship not.
Well, that sounds like how we do security and building our systems. We'll build it, we'll field it, we'll get the money coming in, and then we have to patch it. And that's why you avoid version 1.0
Right.
because it's got no security in
That's
it.
exactly right. And what we've created is this huge system of systems, which is 1.0. And we hope it and us, and that's what I say, we have to start thinking of how we and the AI can team up to work together. And this should not be a shock to people. It's the extent of what an AI can do that is the shock. But you could take all of computing, for heaven's sakes. You could take spears made of iron and bronze and what it did, or stirrups for cavalry. You can do all sorts of technological changes to transform the world. And then everybody factored them in and thought on that basis, and 19th century electric lights suddenly ended night. So instead of having day and night, you had perpetual day. And then you had entertainment and shopping at night and going out for dinner and things that you didn't have before. And I was struck by the fact, I think it was in the 1700s, that the French had a law, maybe 1600s, 1700s, that if you went out at night, and this is dark. Now, this is like what do you say? Steers took us at midnight in Great Lebowski. You go out at night, it's dark. I mean, it's not like there's a light here and a light. There's no light. It's dark. And therefore, that's when crime happened. And the French had a law that you had to carry a lantern. And the purpose of the lantern was not to illuminate your pathway. It was so you could be identified. And I thought, is that any different but scaled up from what's happened on the internet? We have identities which can be identified, and therefore we can, and we have DNA and cold case studies now that are blowing people's minds by going back through the genome. We can do all these things that we couldn't do before.
So let's think about it as we're getting close to the end of our allotted time here. And again, I'd love to do this for hours and hours, and I hope our folks who started are still here just because I find your thought process fascinating. But if we want to say the necessity for thinking like a hacker, and I had given you some feedback and you would come back with a response. And my first view of that was you've laid out this problem, the complexities, you've enumerated them, you offered the challenge, but you didn't really offer a methodology or an alteration of thought. You came back with actually sort of a different response that said, yeah, you're not going to be prescriptive and following a formula. You're going to think a little bit differently. So, and that's what aligns with the hackers. That may be kind of the grand ending of this whole thing, just like a good mystery novel as we come here.
The tree branches, and you don't know what the branches are going to branch and how they're going to branch into the future. And what I suggested was, I used the example of how I had an epiphany that took me out of the world of print and made me realize that what the internet revolution had done was make me have a global possibility. And you mentioned Islands in the Clickstream. I was writing that for a magazine here in print, and then the light bulb went on when I had words left over from a Wired article way back. Where can I do it? And the light bulb went on, and I said, don't just write about the internet, use the internet. And within weeks, I wrote for South Africa Computer Magazine for years. Every month, I wrote for UK and Australia and Canadian periodicals, and I became a global presence. And that column, within a couple of years, was going to 60,000 people in I don't know.
You end up being an international speaker with an awful lot of fascinating.
1,000 people in 60 countries is what it was.
Yeah.
And suddenly I had a platform that established credibility for my thinking about these things that in turn let me make a living as a speaker addressing them. And that started in 93. And we forget 93 was the first year you could do something commercially on the internet. And I happened to leave the ministry to be a speaker and writer that year. And suddenly there were audiences everywhere who said, what is this thing, the internet? What is this cyberspace? And is it going to affect my business? People literally were in the dark. And my goal was to shed some light on that. But you ran up against the same kind of push here. Like I went to the Editors and Publishers Conference, big annual conference, and tried to tell them at that time, newspapers are over the way you thought of them. And they said literally to my face, "Who the hell are you? We've been in this business 50 years. Who are you to waltz in here and tell us about our business?" Well, what I am was an insightful person who could connect the dots and see where things were going to go by simply following the technology. If this is what's happening, how is it going to affect behavior, societal structures, spiritual structures, everything, even religions? And everything I predicted about that all those years ago has come true.
So as we wrap up here, for those of us who are in the cybersecurity community, most of our listeners are senior folks who want to aspire to that level. Any last words of wisdom or insight, kind of a peek around the corner to say, I can see something that you can't, and believe it or not, here's what's going to
You
happen.
provoked it. It's take it a step at a time, because engaging with the new technologies will transform your understanding of what's possible. And then you will see new things, and then you trial and error them, and you see what you can do. And then hackers, I know, the real hackers, wonderful, wonderful cadre of human beings. Don't buy any of the BS of what a system they are told is to do. They look at it and say, yeah, but if you do this, then it'll do this. The ability to engage with even the most complex systems and look for opportunities to do things they weren't made to do is what makes you a good hacker. And, the history of everything we're talking about is replete with lots of examples that we all know. You're one. We know lots of players in this field who had this gift. And that's why I said, look, ADHD is not a bug, it's a feature.
Yeah, and also the ability to reach in and say, wait a minute, what about this? And you come up with something like, how did you find it?
And you know that you're going to be sold by corporate structure. Don't go there. That's not what we pay you for. Or other thinkers, you can't do that, or that's not true. And they're going to call you crazy, as I have been called.
Yeah.
And I've lived long enough to get validation, not crazy, just insightful.
That's a very good distinction. So with that, we're going to have to wrap up. But for our watchers and our listeners, thank you for joining Richard Thieme on this CISO Tradecraft episode. If you love the way he thinks, as I do, send us a note. Give us a thumbs up. Let us know that we're doing the right stuff and exposing you to some interesting thoughts or ideas. I'm going to put in our show notes the links to his books. He's got a number of them, several that I didn't even hold up. There's some more here and the like. That I think you just find it quite interesting to get inside his way of thinking. And so as a result, I would encourage you to expose yourself to his ideas while you can, because he's done a wonderful job of taking a long lifetime. I'm not going to give away your age, although I know it, and translating that into ideas, thoughts, wisdom, and even fiction as a medium by which you could get the message.
It's so eager, Mark. I'm 80. And we were just looking at all these programs they want you to use online for when can I retire and so on. And it all said, don't forget, men will be dead in their 80s and women at 87. And we said, wait a minute, we're done. We don't have to fill out this form.
Yeah, you're in sudden death overtime, right? You're not in fourth quarter or something. There.
We're grateful for it. My father dropped dead when I was 2. My mother had cancer and died when I was 20. And I'm still going. And obviously, the brain is not quite done.
But, all right, well, wonderful. We'll hope to have you back on the show. Anyway, thank you very much, everybody. This is your host, G. Mark Hardy, for CISO Tradecraft. Until next time, stay safe out there.